Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Tracky Leadership in Action. I'm Bob Audette, Partner Lead of Data Management Practice at Guidehouse. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing a phenomenal panel focused on refining the roles and responsibilities of the CDO. We certainly have heard a lot across numerous sessions over the past few days, and I think it'll be interesting to hear some of the refining points from this particular panel. And a couple housekeeping items. This session is going to be recorded. That recording will be available 3 months from now on the YouTube channel for MIT. Also for questions, certainly for those that are attending virtually, please put your questions in the Wahuva app. Also, I will go around the room with the mic. Please introduce yourself, where you're from, pose your question, and hopefully we'll have a lively session. So I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our moderator, Elena Alikhachkina. She's a CDO executive advisor. She's a multi sort of CDO, chief data analytics officer across numerous different organizations. She's had numerous involvement with the MIT CDO Symposium as a track producer, as a speaker. She also is one of the first sort of certified individuals on the CDO certification. And with that, I will pass it to Elena to introduce the panel.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Robert. I'm so happy to be here. And welcome. Yes, coming in. Yeah, so we're going to have more people come in. Super excited. So I did hear so much actually through the last couple of days and day 3. So how people define this place. And many people keep saying community. This is where people actually come, have a connection, have a discussion. So this is really a big differentiator. I mean, it's a huge differentiator from all different events which have been running in the data and analytics industry, right? So what we're going to do through this panel, and in a second, I'm going to introduce people you already know. They don't need introduction, but I'll do introduction anyway, right? So what we're going to do, I summarized over last 2 days. We actually had 7 sessions, have been touching the topic of what is the role of CDO, what is success factor of CDO, how CDO creates a mission, how CDO and CIO is interacting, right? So you had a chance to attend some of the sessions. Maybe somebody attended all of the sessions, right? So we definitely do not want to repeat what was already discussed, right? But we would love to summarize at a certain extent. And our panelists are going to provide their perspective, what they heard, what they actually talked to people about, and provide the summary. So don't feel that the questions we are putting on the screen, you're going to repeat it. Yeah, we're repeating, but we would love to kind of create a summary, right? Also, I would love this session to be a little bit more interactive. So at the end, when we go through our thoughts, as panelists, we're going to ask the audience. We're going to ask the audience to get, if you leave this wonderful community symposium, what is going to be your takeaway on the role of CDO, right? Maybe like one takeaway, right? So it would be really great if at the end of session you can actually share with us, right? And we're going to put this into the next year preparation because this type of session we're going to continue, and we're going to put more research into the defining the role of CDO. Sounds great? Okay, doc, let's go. So I'm going to start from introductions. And again, I don't need to introduce Mark. You know Mark really well. So Mark Ramsey, he's multiple times Chief Data Officer. Most recently, I think the GlaxoSmithKline, right? So the JSK. So now Mark is working as advisor, and he's advising an enormous amount of companies actually in establishing the CDO practices. And the most critical, what are success factors actually, right? So welcome.
Thank you.
Really happy to have you here. And by the way, after the session, Mark is going to be running his session here. So, don't leave, stay. Yes. So Dr. Wang, doesn't need introduction, right? But I'm just so happy that at one point of my life, I had the chance to meet Richard. And I met him through the this my was first interaction. I was in his class for CDO certificate. I think this was the first ever class, if I remember, right? So I basically was one of the first people who went through the certification program. This is how we met, and this is how we started partner on some interesting topics. So thank you so much, Richard, for continuing your leadership. We need that so much.
Thank you.
I would love to introduce Peggy. So Peggy, she is Chief Data Officer for Big ID. So Big ID is one of our sponsors here. You can see here, right? So Peggy is a huge community advocate, right? So Peggy just recently kicked off Women in Tech in Japan. Can you mention? Yeah, in Japan. Right, so she's really big advocate for promoting diversity. She's a true community leader and connector. I feel I know her for ages, but this is my first time I'm meeting her in person, right? So, this is so wonderful to have Peggy here. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Sounds great. So let's go into question. So the first question is, and again, what are the key roles and responsibilities of a chief data officer in today's evolving data landscape? Right, and keeping in mind, this was already discussed during a couple last days, right? But providing your perspective, like what are your takeaways, right? So, or you feel something was not discussed or missing.
So,
let's go from
if I may,
yes. Okay.
before he talks, I want to provide some historical perspective. We had the first CDO forum in 2011 at Crystal City next to Pentagon when I was the Deputy Chief Data Officer there. And I found out that in order for the data community to make progress, you have to have a voice in the C-suite. So I had the first MIT Army forum. I abused it. I used MIT and Army. The inspection general was very unhappy, but we did it anyway. And only about 35 attendees, but either they're general or they're from major companies. And there are 3 people who made a lot of difference. One of them is from Gartner Group, Joe Bagaitsky. Okay, number 3 in Gartner. And the second one is from IBM, Courtney Abercrombie. And the third one was Maria Villa from SAP. They came and they actually saw the opportunity. They each started their CDO business. And so today Gartner has a CDO division and SAP has very good data CDO practice. And I forgot to say, Joe Bagaitsky, the Gartner. Anyway, so that's when we started. The point that I was trying to make is at the end, Joe Bagaitsky started to do a survey of the key people, everybody in that forum, as well as different companies, to define what is CDO. So it ended up with a few pages in the CDO1 certificate program. Basically, at that time, I want to point out the responsibilities, data architecture, enterprise architecture. Nowadays, when you see CDO, you laugh at it and say, no, nobody does that. But that's the way that we evolved from 2010, 11 to now. You have the floor.
Yes, Mark. Yeah.
By the way, the event that Rich is talking about was invitation only, and I didn't get invited. So it took me 2 years before I actually got invited. It was still about the same size in 2013 when I attended, and but it's kind of continued to evolve. It's gotten a little bigger, you may have noticed this year, than the 30 people. But yeah, I think, back to the question around the evolving role, and I think certainly generative AI is changing some of the data sources, but it's actually making more visibility and reinforcing the need for the CDO role, because you really can't take advantage of any of the advanced analytics and things without the data. And I would say, as a data community, if you look back, I've been doing this for 35 years, and we've failed in a lot of areas, which I don't know that we necessarily like to talk about, but if you think back as to most organizations don't have a cohesive data strategy, they don't have an inventory of all the data in the organization, they don't have an access to that data, I mean, I don't want to bum you out on a third day of the CDO event, but I mean, I think we haven't accomplished a lot of things. And we always talk about all the stuff we've done and the value and all that, but I think the role is still evolving because we're trying to figure out how to remove the roadblocks that have prevented us from being as successful in really turning data into a strategic asset, and why we haven't been able to do that. So I think that continues to evolve. Certainly the visibility on some of the potential benefits of using data is making the role even more important. I know Rich has an objective that every company have a CDO, and I think I would like every company to recognize that data is one of the most strategic assets within their organization, and then treat it that way. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that, when a few years ago, we tried to define what is a CDO, and it's like the senior most, executive within an organization that has responsibility for data. I'd like to see that continue to move further up in the organization because it's not at the level, I mean, I would say still, and Randy Bean, and between the different surveys that have all been done with Randy and Joe Laney and all these, the organizations are appointing CDOs, but we need to continue to make it a more senior role because unfortunately, and this is my non-verified result, but I think about 80% of the CDO roles are still way too technical. They're way too low in the organization. So I think it's good to get it appointed, but I think we have to do much better of getting it elevated in the organization. And but that we still have a lot to do. So I mean, it means that we're not going to get bored and we're not going to run out of things to do.
Yeah.
I think you make a really great point there, Mark, in terms of the actual positioning of where the CDO sits in an organization. And my perspective in the next hour or so will be collectively my customers that I talk to, a lot of chief data officers, how they evolved in their role. So not my personal role as a CDO yet. So I'll talk about that later. I mean, I think certainly, if you look at the last 5 years at least, where chief data officers sit. When I worked in organizations like Morgan Stanley and insurance companies like AIG, certainly we were always in more of an IT-centric role. But I think where CDOs are being more elevated today and where they're more of an equalizer is when they are peers with the technology officers and the other C-suite executives. And I think that gives them more of an equal standing, certainly in that role and responsibilities. And if you think about it's ever changing, the role, the responsibilities is ever changing. I think even just 5 years ago, a chief data officer was only responsible for mainly data management, data quality, data stewardship. It was very simplistic. And now the complexities of what chief data officers have to think about is the entirety of data in an entire organization, whether it's privacy operations. And I see that increasingly as well. A lot of chief data officers are now responsible for the compliance and the privacy regulations, the data itself that the chief privacy officer has dictated and how that should be reported on, governed, protected. A chief data officer is responsible for that. I just wanted to share a quick story about one of our customers. He's actually been a chief data officer for 8 years at Synchrony Financial. And I think that far exceeds the longevity of a 2.5-year tenure. And one of the questions I asked him was how did he maintain the longevity, normally because of the average tenure of only being 2 to 3 years. And the interesting answer he gave me was that when he first joined the company, first he thought about not breaking the culture of the organization, because I think that's key. Culture eats strategy, right? So he went in with a very open mindset, collaborating with all the C-suites, really listening to what they had to say. But as he slowly gained their trust, he knew he had a 10-year vision, actually. So he's only 8 years into his 10-year vision. So he knew what he was implementing, and he was very slow and methodical about it. But he was not just focused on the data and data governance. He worked across the security team, the compliance team. When the organization had a merger and acquisition, he was instrumental in guiding the CEO in terms of looking at the data assets that are going to be involved in the mergers acquisitions. He he inserted himself in the conversations of all things relevant to data in an organization. So I think being able to be that collaborator and to insert yourself not just from single pillar of data management is key. So I think other sessions talked about certainly generative AI. I'm not going to elaborate, repeat all that's been said, but I think making the chief data officer the position that's more equal in the organization, but also being patient and expanding how data is utilized in the entire organization beyond the traditional functions, because as we all know, it does go beyond the traditional responsibilities that a chief data officer had just a few mere years ago.
Okay. If I may, I want to speak as Maria Villa, because this session was Maria's idea. And if you know Maria, she has been tracking maturity of CDOs. Last year, he actually has a theme. He wants to track the theme of her track to be maturity and see what CDO does the first year, the second year, and third year, and fourth year. So there's a hypothesis that the job of CDO changes over time. You're doing this today, and 5 years later you do that. There's another theory that I have, which I tested this morning, to Elena's son. Elena's son has been here helping. By the way, if you're a high school kid, bring them here to do the things.
Yeah, say
we
him
welcome
hi.
that. So what's the point? Today, I brought a check to him. Say, Daniel, write your name on a check, $1,000. You can pick, write down as girlfriend's fund or college fund. And he looked at me and said, I never wrote a check. So what's the point here? The point is that if you have never been a CDO, doesn't matter how it evolves. The first 90 days is still the same. Okay, so after that, and that's Maria's idea, is to have a way to survey, document the CDO's role from year one, the first 90 days to first year to 3 years. And now we have a lot of CDOs with more than 5 years, okay, provided they don't get fired or they quit. And that's another thing that we have to talk about in some sense. Okay.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So I would say sometimes if we think about like evolving, right? So at certain point it does mean uncertainty. Is that I can evolve, right? My personal perspective, evolving is actually really powerful, right? Because we have an opportunity to influence this, how we're gonna evolve, right? And I think the communities like this, so we have a power to, with our research, with our collective mindset, to really demonstrate where the evolvement should be going, right? So I would look at evolvement as opportunity, and especially if you link to a presentation which Richard did on the day one, saying that we have opportunity in the collective research, right? For us to influence this evolvement, right? What direction do we believe? Yeah, it should be business role. It should be much higher in organization. It should be more decision-making role, right? So I think this is going to be the power. So thank you. We have more questions. So one question which have been coming constantly over the 7 sessions we had is how the terminology, right? So the CDO became as CDO, Chief Digital is also CDO. Chief Diversity is also CDO, by the way, right? So CDO is like so many acronyms, right? But definitely in context of our event, the discussion was still happening is how these executive roles are different. So can we say, here is one difference, I believe the biggest one, or there are 2 biggest differences between the role of Chief Data, Chief Technology, or Chief Digital in today's view. Right, and of course it can evolve, right? So who wants to start? Mark? Okay, let's go.
Yeah, I mean, it does get to be confusing. I mean, it's interesting that we didn't previously have a chief analog officer, and then suddenly we create. I mean, I always thought about why. I mean, it's like okay. I mean, from my perspective and what I've seen with different organizations, I mean, there's always been long-winded discussions between the role of the CDO and the CIO or the Chief Technology Officer. Fundamentally, again, I think it's important that the chief data officer be the person that represents data in the organization. The chief information officer, ironically, even though it has information in the name, is really about the infrastructure. It's about the technology, it's about the networks and the computers and keeping all of that running. And oh, by the way, on those computers we store data, and that's about the length of the focus of a normal CIO is yes, the data is on the network, is on the hardware. The chief data officer, again, it's really to try to drive the strategic value of the data within the organization. If the role is really just data governance and quality, then that can be an IT function, because most organizations, I don't personally agree. I think data quality is a business responsibility, but that's a whole different session that we can talk about. But in a lot of organizations, data architecture, those kinds of things are considered IT functions. So that's really, again, if we have the senior most role in the organization around data, that means they're having discussions on how can we monetize the data that we have to change the way we're operating the business? How can we create a new, complete line within our organization? Those are the kind of discussions that I think a chief data officer would have. Digital, in a lot of organizations, again, it's confusing there, but I think the way I think of it is the digital officer is that electronic interface of how the organization is going to use IoT devices, how are they going to use the different channels to the customer, and so it's again a use of data, and unfortunately it's CDO and CDO, which that's a whole different story. But regardless of what the title is, it's really around the responsibilities and what these roles are trying to accomplish. And of course, there was a session around the interplay between CIO and CDO, which is in most organizations can be interesting, especially if the CIO, if that person believes that they own data, then there can be some challenges in the organization. But if done correctly, then the CIO recognizes that they're helping to facilitate the value that the organization is getting from the data. I've had both situations. I've had the headbutting with the CIOs, and I've had cases where it's a more of a collaborative relationship.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark.
So just a little plug here. I'm part of the Carnegie Mellon Chief Data Officer certification program, and these are exactly the type of topics we talk about. Specifically, what does the first 90 days of a chief data officer look like? Certainly a core part of the curriculum is building out that data strategy, that business strategy. And when I look at organizations that I worked at and I consult for, certainly the first responsibility is really interpreting and prioritizing the business use cases, what those business drivers are, and then prioritizing the data that goes into it. So that's the first part of a chief data officer, and their partners certainly are the different technology functions as well. And I think this is where a chief data officer has that responsibility, has that leadership, strategic vision to really execute that, to drive that data literacy across the board. Just another example that I want to share. One of my really good friends, Wendy Turner-Williams, is the former chief data officer of Tableau and also Salesforce. And when she took on the role of chief data officer within Tableau, she showed me her organizational chart. And it was this long in terms of a PowerPoint. And not only did she own the traditional, underneath her were the traditional data governance, data quality, data stewardship, she made sure the platforms were rolling into her organization. Data literacy, change management, project management team. She really built out all the additional functionalities, and if she was still there, AI would have certainly rolled underneath her. And I think that really more complete, holistic vision of what you can be doing with the data, and actually, I firmly believe that a chief data officer should also own the platform systems as well. That's just more complete control and engineering, but all the data that goes into it, as well as maintaining the quality of that data and having that equal level in terms of the other C-suite peers and the business unit is really key as well.
Thank you so much, Peggy. Rich, anything you want to add?
I can talk for 3 hours. Okay. How long do you want me to talk?
Okay.
Okay, so let me just say a few bunker stickers. CIO is important. That's what we, a CDO, you have to say, number one, if I am against you, CDO against CIO, my career will be over very fast. The CIO in the old days, CIO stands for career is over. For CDOs, if you don't collaborate with CIOs, your career will be over very fast because they hold all the database schemas.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's item one. Item two fact is that, to my knowledge still, most of CDOs would like to report to the chairman of the board, if not to the CEO. Unfortunately, my previous 2 jobs, no matter how we manipulate, I was always under CIO. So CIO is your boss because when they organize CDO functions, they move around, eventually still under CIO. So CIO is a vertical function, as Mark said, it's an infrastructure work. I always say that CDO is a horizontal function, go across different areas. The business of CDO is business. That's a differentiation. But work with the CIO together and always get the CIO on board. Another question is related with different functions. I had the first inaugural CDO summit at Little Rock. The governor came and said, well, they have CTO, technology officer, privacy officer, data officer. And so eventually what we recommended is that so many functions, Mr. Hutchins, he want to reduce the number of direct report. So the idea was to start a center of excellence. The center of excellence, hopefully the director is a CDO, whether it's data or digital. And then technology officer is one part of that. Okay. Mm-hmm. The analytic officer, you don't want to have every agency, every department to have an analytic officer, which is what's happening now. Just like in the old days, every department has their own database. It's happening, but for the analytic officer can be part of a pool in the center of excellence. Privacy officer, you only need one for the entire organization. So if you have a center of excellence, you can basically put the chief CDO, CPO, CTO, CAO into that. And the CIO, of course, will come to you and say, oh, by the way, data is part of information, so let me be the chief, you will be the deputy. But that way you can put all of them together. But increasingly, though, I realize nowadays I see that the chief data officer do not report to CIO, so I'm very happy about that. I think we are being evolving to be more successful because organizations realize that you really cannot put CDO under CIO, so that's an achievement.
Yeah, thank you so much, Richard. I think I just want to add maybe from my perspective, I think one of the area of opportunity, because I think what Mark said, infrastructure, I think it's pretty clear. Infrastructure should be like in a technology camp, right? Network infrastructure, right? But there is an area of a business applications, right? And business applications, these are data applications, right? So if you look at big companies like consumer packaged goods, trade promotion. What is trade promotion? I mean, this is coupons we all get in when we buy products, right? So this trade promotion, it's data. It's data. 80% of this system is data, right? So in reality, this system is operational system. When people are go to make a sales, they actually use this system to pull the data from, right? So what I'm observing that this type of business systems, they actually owned by CIO organizations. So CDOs have still little influence in terms of how the data designed in these systems. And you need operational system because salespeople need to do sales. They're not going to go to your data lake, right? So I think this area of opportunity, how the business applications now going to be kind of guided by CDO, because then you're going to get more holistic data architecture and infrastructure, right? So you're not just guiding your lake. You're also guiding the business applications, how the data actually going into business applications, right? So this, I think, this key differentiator for me, which is big opportunity and not quite of happening.
Oh, one more point. I think we can claim we make progress if CDO is parallel to CIO. Yeah. I think that would be quite an achievement. I tell you where that actually happened. You may not believe it. China, central government set up a policy. Every agency in China's province must have a CDO. And the CDO work in parallel with CIO. I said, wow, that's really, must be my student who wrote that. And so they have CDO in every province, every county have to have one. So if you want to go to China, and don't go to jail, it's a lot of profit, a lot of fun to be there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I
Mark, you
think
want to
it
add
just-
something? Yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe just a contrasting view. I guess one of the things, I mean, if I focus on the CDO helping the strategic use of data, what I've tried to do in the roles that I've been in is actually not take over end-to-end data, because there's some evolution that's happening within companies that it means, I mean, we used to have this theory, if you back up 25 years ago, that we were going to have an enterprise data model and everything was going to be controlled, and when they build applications, I mean, that ship sailed a long time ago. Now we have an environment where most companies, the CIO is negotiating to use, we'll pick on Salesforce, right? So all the sales is done in Salesforce.
Yep.
I'm a CDO. If I want to own that, I mean, I have
you don't want
no impact. I'm not going to go to Salesforce and say, change all your attributes to match my enterprise data model, right? So there's I mean, and like was mentioned, the last role that I had for an organization was at GSK, and I actually tried to stay away from the operational data because if you take on more and more and more and you have everything under some big org, then you have to deal with all of that.
Yep.
So then you get nothing accomplished.
Yep.
And strategic use of data is not fixing an attribute in an operational database. That in my mind is something that we should allow the CIO to control, right? It's operational systems, the execution of all of that. Have the CIO control that. That's great. Focus on bringing the data together, getting a very robust inventory of the data in the organization, helping understand what data is being used, what data isn't being used, and then drive the analytic value, which is why we see more CDOs that are now becoming Chief Data and Analytic Officer, because you get the value when you make a decision on the data. You get no value for storing the data. You get no value for a lot of the activities. And so if you begin to build an org that tries to deal with all of those things, you get nothing done. And so I think we should think about, I mean, if you want to grow in an organization, be a big executive, you want to take on more and more and more and all this. But if you want to have action and you want to get things done, if you can zero down and narrow down the focus on things that really matter, I think that's something that we should think about. And I think that's maybe just a little bit different. That I know there's been lots of discussions around. They need to own all the data, own all the DBAs. As soon as you do that, then you have so many people that you're not able to focus. And that's why I also am a big proponent that the CDO doesn't necessarily get involved with data governance, other than making sure that the business has something established and deals with the governing of the data. But that's this movement, and that Rich and Dr. Lee and the paper around the dimensions of a CDO. I think we just have to be careful not to try to take on all of that, because then we extend the time and we reduce the impact. And so I think that is just something to think about.
Yeah. And if I may, so Mark, if you listen to him, there are two keywords. One was value, the other was impact. And that's the evolution. In the early days of CDO, nobody was talking about value proposition. All talk about enterprise architecture, data architecture, maybe a little bit change management. But to the credit of Gartner, I think in 2019 they came out and said, those CDO who do not produce value proposition will not be here much longer. In other words, they said that what they said, I believe, was CDOs are increasingly asked by the C-suite to take a portion of the revenue, be responsible for that. And I think that's the direction that as a CDO evolve, like Daniel, her son, as he graduated from college, he's going to bring money to home, right? So.
Okay,
So what Mark is saying, I agree with as well, is Chief Data Officer cannot govern or be responsible for all the data in the organization, but being able to prioritize what those important data sets are, what those critical data domains are, and start there, right? You have to show value fairly quickly as a role in your an organization, otherwise you will get, canned after less than 2 years. So being able to prioritize what those critical domains are, what those key business processes, and what those data elements look like, and being able to govern that and ensure high quality, ensure that it aligns to and does drive business value. That's absolutely key.
And so I think maybe I'll ask the audience. I know that everybody likes to talk, nobody wants to listen. So one of the points that we made here is that you have to value proposition, and you need to start to find some strategic values or some project that bring.
Yeah.
So the question I always have to my students is, how do you identify projects that you can actually be successful to establish your credit and make money for the organizations? Maybe that's a question.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Actually, we did talk about this a lot during Tom's session and Randy's session when we had the five CDOs question, right? So, but maybe we'll take who is the most brave, like one person in the audience. How you would, how you basically identify this first 1, 2, 3 project where you can say, okay, this is where I'm gonna show the value. Any share like trick or any approach you use at work? Yes, please go ahead. Yeah.
Why not, since it's quiet? Well, I'll just throw how to find value is a question.
Yes.
Well, so for context, I'm in the federal government. So I'm not looking to monetize. I'm looking to help people in humanity. But if I'm going to be looking for anything to show value, it's been in automation. Where can we best use data to kind of help the organization in resource shifting? So it's a way to kind of get money back in a way, right? We're not saving per se, right? The CFO will say, show me the money that you saved lately. I didn't, right? But we did resource shift so we could put humans to higher value work. So anyway, I'd say that there's a context for you.
Okay, thank you so much. Can I ask like a follow-up question? Raise your hand if you see the primary use cases in efficiency and savings in your organization. If like a number one, this is what, like federal government is asking, like show me money, how you doing this better, efficient, I do automation, right? And the second I'm gonna ask, show me who is saying I want growth. I love it. That's so much growth, right? Yeah. So which good that focusing on growth cases. Honestly, it's most powerful. Yeah, but don't forget about efficiency.
Yeah, and again, cost savings, growth. I mean, it's really what the organization. I mean, I think again, if you get back to our earlier premise that the CDO is a role that's interacting with the senior executives. I mean, the approach that I've always taken is you get a laundry list of stuff from people as to what they want, and we love to call those use cases, and that's great. So, but you go through each use case and say, okay, what's the business impact of that use case? And that's not something that the CDO is trying to quantify. I mean, I think that's where we get ourselves in trouble, right? As a CDO, I don't qualify it. The business needs to qualify it. So if the business has an interest, then that person needs to commit to what the value. I always ask them to commit 2 things, right? So you have the use case. Everybody likes to put up these ideas. It's like, okay, for that idea, what is the impact to the business? What's the quantification of the impact? And it can be cost savings, it can be increased revenue, it can be whatever, but the business needs to quantify that. And number 2 is the agreement that if that's actually delivered, that they will use it. Because everybody likes to ask for more, like give me this report, give me this or that, and it's going to be beneficial, but they keep doing what they used to do. And so that's this transformation that has to happen to the point where I would have like a little contract that says, if this and we deliver it, then you agree to use it and you agree that this is the value. And then what I would do is go to the executive leadership team and say, we have 85 use cases, here's the priority, here's the money that the business is saying that they're going to drive or save or whatever. The leadership team is the one that needs to help prioritize that because there may be other strategic initiatives that they feel like one of those 85 is more important than even what the business recognizes. But as soon as CDOs get into this mode of they're trying to decide what to do, and you're already lost, because it's got to be something that strategically the business signs up for. So you start with 85, you pick the top whatever. I usually try to go for a dozen. There's no magic in that. It's like maybe you end up with 8, maybe you end up with 15. And those all have to be prioritized, because sometimes the ones with the bigger value take the longest. And how do you break all of those down in that you can deliver things in 3-month increments so that you continue to show value to the business? But I do think we get ourselves into trouble because we try to make that decision, we try to implement it, we try to, we don't drive the value. At the end of the day, the business has to be in a position to drive the value.
Yeah, no, thank you.
So, actually, I want to sort of
Okay.
expand on that as well. Sorry. So, there's a great quote that I recently was told by a chief data officer, but he didn't have the title of a chief data officer. He had the title of just head of data. And he was new to the organization, and he saw himself as, does everyone know the Bette Midler song, The Wind Beneath Your Wings? Yeah. So that's what, no, I'm sorry, it's not karaoke time. He saw his role as really supporting all the business efforts and units. He didn't see himself as leading the change in the data. Certainly, in large enterprise, complex organizations, there's already execution from a silo perspective in terms of analytics, reporting. They didn't see a need for enterprise data management or for a chief data officer to suddenly insert himself and start making all these decisions, right? He read the room. He saw the culture in the organization. He really saw himself, the way that to add value is to build a cross-functional council, and they would be the ones prioritizing projects in terms of time to value, and the other axis was in terms of value to the organization. So being able to plot those out in his first 90 days in his role, and then work with a council to prioritize which of these projects they would tactically deliver on, and also focus on solving cross-functional issues. It's very easy, relatively, right, in organizations to solve data issues within a line of business, but to do that across teams, across multiple initiatives, that's really where the value of a data officer goes as well. Sorry.
No, it's really good. So know what I'm gonna make, I have a power as moderator, I'm gonna make executive decision to skip this question, because I think we did talk about the challenges and opportunities, how the role is defined. I want to advance to this role, and actually I'm gonna start from Peggy here. I got an interesting comment recently. Somebody told me, look, Google doesn't have chief data officer, Amazon doesn't have chief data officer, so this means there is something wrong, right? At the same time, we do see that there is a lot of consulting companies, advertising agencies, tech providers are actually appointing CDO type of role, right? So Peggy, maybe you can start from your perspective, because you working on a tech provider side, right? As a chief data officer, you have clients, like your clients are chief data officers. So how you see your role being on a provider side of a chief data officer, and do providers, agencies, advertising agencies, consulting companies, do they need the CDO, and what is the role?
I love this question, Elena, because when we talked about this yesterday, this is a perspective that I like to share with other chief data officers. Certainly, we're all familiar with the traditional roles of a chief data officer, but what does it look like as a vendor, as a tech provider? And I think that those of you who've talked to other vendors out there in the booths, some of them do have a chief data officer, and I'll take Microsoft for example. Eric is a external chief data officer, and Microsoft is large enough to also have an internal chief data officer. So I think the responsibilities of an internal chief data officer is certainly the one that we're familiar with. And I think what's exciting, again, the evolution in this role is the responsibilities of a external chief data officer. And what does that look like? what value does it add? And certainly, I'll share how I define this role. Again, it didn't exist before at Big ID. I came in, was hired as the VP of Data Solutions, and I really had to fight for the title of a Chief Data Officer after the first year. And the reason why they gave it to me was because they wanted to elevate me to have these C-suite level conversations. So I think having the title is certainly important, but just being an external CDO, just really quickly, I defined my role as participating and helping shape our product. So I did a lot of product development. I built a lot of the governance capabilities that we have today. But then it evolved, right? Now we have a advisory consulting group underneath me. I point to Steven, who's on my team. So that's where we have, we're able to have smarter conversations with customers because my job is not in sales. Like I'm not selling a product offering, but in terms of being able to educate our customers and to have really meaningful conversations with prospects on the value of data, where they are in their data maturity, how we can guide them along, what pain points they have, what gaps we can help fill or not fill with our solution, guide them to our partners in terms of making them have a holistic solution. So it's really that aspect. And when I look at folks like Cindy Houston from ThoughtSpot, Solid Data has an external CDO, Lorraine Waters, there's like Maria Villar used to, as Chief Data Officer at SAP. Certainly there are a few of us in this role, and I think it's a very exciting, when you think about career opportunities as well, people that have been in data management. I've done this, been in this space, for working for financial services companies and now being able to pivot and be on the product side is very interesting, but having that experience certainly, hopefully makes me a little bit more credible on the vendor side as well, but that's up to my peers to determine.
In the interest of time, I passed, but I thought the session title is the evolving
CDO role.
So I would like to pass on to the audience to say, is it that the CDO's role is going from first year, then how to write a check, slowly to be in charge? Is everyone goes through that process, or the CDO role is like, over time it evolved from a rat to a kangaroo? There were different.
Yeah, no, but we see is like it's evolving. Like providers didn't have it before, right? So now providers have the CDO role, which also play internal and external, like basically like external facing. So this is the big role.
Yeah.
But may I actually ask you and Mark, whatever who actually brave to answer this question, and this provocative question, which I got, like, like Amazon doesn't have CDO. Why?
Well, I mean, again, in the folks that I know with Amazon, I mean, it was built as an information company from the ground up is one of the reasons, and Google it's built so they believe that the first CDO, and I know there's, these folks have disagreement as to which, but Yahoo, it appointed the first CDO, and you would think Yahoo was a data organization, but I think Google and Amazon, they because they've been built from the ground up and they operate on data, there's not anyone in the organization that maybe carries that title, but I mean, obviously they're very information, where if you look at a traditional organization, an insurance company that's 100 years old, or a bank, or what, I mean, they've gone through eras. They did start by having chief analog officers because things were written down, and to Rich's point, people used to write checks, and they used to fly the checks around on airplanes and all, so it was very much an analog world. So then as this progressed and data became more fundamental to the organization, it was important to have that. Now, I'm not saying that Amazon or Google might not have the need, they just maybe not recognize it at this point.
I think they need, because I'm just talking from my perspective, working with them is such a mess. You cannot find anything in Microsoft, you cannot find anything in Google. I mean, honestly, you have to reach so many different divisions. Right?
So like I said, it may be because in the view of the organization, they've started at a different point.
Yeah, okay.
Microsoft did have a CDO.
Yeah, but Microsoft got one.
It's
Yeah.
internally grown because they went all over the world to find a CDO. Eventually, they get one of their own.
Yeah.
Like 10 minutes. So.
Yeah,
Okay.
the only comment I would make on the external, what Peggy refers to as an external CDO, is I do think there's a lot of vendors that have put that role in place because they feel like it gives them the ability to then interact with CDOs within organizations, because it's like, oh, I'm a CDO, I'm going to talk to you. So it's a peer discussion. And some organizations, it's strictly because of that. It's not because they're trying to help the industry or whatever. It's because they feel like it's their way to get to a CDO, is call themselves CDOs. And I think I think companies have to be careful with that, because if they put people in that role that don't have the background in data management, like you're saying you have, or like that you have, they just run the risk that it's going to be viewed as, hey, this is a role just to get access, and I think that's a risky proposition for the vendors. And
Yeah.
so we're seeing a proliferation of these roles. Like Peggy described it, I think it's an excellent role, but I don't know that every vendor is building
Is
the
built
role
the
in
same,
that
yeah.
same way. I think there's a lot of
Yep.
folks that it's almost like a ceremonial title
Exactly.
versus head of product, or head of customer sales type of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, 10 minutes.
Okay, yeah, we can 10 minutes. So I think just I'm gonna start a little bit also like summarizing, and we can say. So the next question we had is like, what evolving skills? So I think we already named skills that data analytics definitely, like over time, it's not just data, it's more analytics, right? So now we're also talking the skills are evolving into AI, right? So AI is another area where the potential skills are evolving. So from panelist perspective, what are the skills else missing? I mean, what we heard through the days, analytics is one of the key area where CDO is evolving in skills. But what else?
Well, let me answer the question.
Yes.
I've been asking that every year, and most of the time the answer is people skill set. The business of CDO is business. You have to have people skill, able to communicate across the board. Okay, and so change management is much more important than knowing what is data architecture.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the items that keep on coming out. Pretty much like when I studied data quality, it came out with many dimensions. One of the dimensions called believability, whether you believe data or not. And I said, I must have done something when I changed the eigenvalue, and it all keep on popping up. Nowadays, everybody knows one dimension of data quality is called credibility or believability. That's, if you don't have credible, I don't use it. And I can talk about tons of examples.
Okay.
In a CDO's job, people skill, I think at the end of the day, is most important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you, Rich. So I would propose, because we have about 8 minutes left, can we go to questions, if we have questions, virtually?
Yeah, let's start first for our virtual attendees, because we have a few questions in the virtual side. This first one, to build, Mark, on one of your comments of should CTOs and CIOs report long-term to CDOs. Can you comment on that?
I mean, the short answer is no, right? I mean, because especially because of the comments that I made earlier, which is you don't want to broaden. I mean, it's one of those fantasy thoughts that, oh, this would be cool, right? Kind of turn the tables or whatever. But no, those are very deep roles that need to exist. There needs to be the collaboration, and I think, again, the risk of trying to make a role that's broader and broader and broader is that you have less and less impact. So. No, I think it would be cool to think about, but then you get back to reality and say let's focus on driving the value from the data.
Yeah.
Got it. Any other comments from the panelists on this thought?
I agree.
Okay. All right. So next question for virtual, and then I'll open it up to the room. Mark, back to you. But if the CDO doesn't get involved in governance and quality of data, won't we see great strategy and catalogs, but serving up bad data quality? And the person noted this seems like a disconnect. So can you comment on that?
Yeah, so and again, I tried to make it somewhat provocative. What I've tried to do is not own data governance. Again, especially if you think about like our Salesforce example, right? If I own data governance and I'm trying to govern the data that's in Salesforce, that is not a strategic use of data. That is, go track down some filter that should have been put in Salesforce to block bad data from coming in. Now, using analytics to identify that we have issues and then using technologies to clean that up. I mean, again, we used to have this thing about, oh, data should be clean at the source and we're not going to touch the data and all these things. All of that is great theory. But when it comes down to it, we pretty much at this point have to acquire data in the format that it comes in and then turn it into what we wanted it to look like at the beginning and then make decisions on that information. And again, it's back to, yes, we can't change data if it's financial reporting and all the, I mean, we can get into a rabbit hole on that. But the bottom line is that if governance needs to be owned by the business, and that may be an initiative that the chief data officer, you know, is involved with but not own. I'm not a big fan of owning everything, because then you own DBAs, you own data governance, you own all this stuff. When do you have time to actually deliver value? Then you don't, right? So that's where narrowing the focus onto those areas where you can drive strategic value, but it's not in exchange for just saying, hey, that's not my problem, you know, so it's a balance.
Sure.
No,
Acting as an enabler. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Back of the difference. I do believe that data governance, whether it's a dirty word or not, is part of the CDO's job, because there are data governance per se, but at the end of the day, when so data across the company or globally become more mature, there's such a thing called data standard. And how do you do data standard? You need to have a body that governs that process, and that's where CDO is.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, we don't always have to agree on everything, right? So I mean, it's like,
Yeah. Some questions in the room. One sec, please.
Thanks. So, this question is to the panel generally. We've talked a lot about strategic data use, data monetization. To what extent does the panel think that going forward, a modern day CDO will need to have some sort of business background, maybe some experience of actually running a P&L?
Absolutely. That's, I think a CDO is not successful unless they know the business and run data as a product, right? Be able to have this monetization thinking strategy. So I want to comment a little bit on what Mark just said about data governance being owned by CDO. I think what we need to define is what is data governance, and I just want to make sure that I'm clear in, you know, for me, data governance is really the standardization, the usage of data across the enterprise, across all data assets. When I think of IT governance, certainly that's where IT teams do own some sort of data quality, data checking, the movement of data, absolutely. But from a business value, data governance-driven perspective, absolutely has to be under the chief data officer. So I just wanted to make that point.
You want to answer? The CDO
Yeah, so in
business
terms
background?
of P&L, any comments on P&L?
I mean, I think it's important that the
Yeah.
CDO be more aligned to a business role. I don't. Again, it's the business of data, not. I mean, when I took the role at GSK, I was not a scientist. I didn't know biology, and what I would tell the folks who that was their expertise was, you know, you don't know data, you don't know how to execute the analytics, and I don't know the biological meaning of the structures. It comes together at ones and zeros, and making sure that we were able to deliver the information that allowed them to make better decisions. I didn't need to have a detailed understanding of exactly what they were doing. Just like I wasn't expecting them to understand all the ways that the information needed to come together. Just one comment on the data governance topic here.
It was actually banned yesterday, so I think it was on
yes.
day one. It's like G word is banned.
I firmly believe that we've lost the battle on a lot of this stuff, and that we need to do fully automated execution around some of these areas, not any of the things that we've tried to do in the past. And we can talk about that later, but
Okay,
I think
let me go back to answer whether it needs business background or not. Over the past 10, 15 years, what I recognize is the CDOs that I met, most of them have technical backgrounds. Okay, and so a CDO needs to have a balance of technical background and business background. And so, in a way, we need to have the CDO understand business, but no, I was a consultant. I went to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, studied this, and I went to a cement company. My partner said, Rich, what are you doing? You're going to go to a different company, and you have a different business. So the key thing I have learned is, yes, business, yes, technical, but most important, listen to the customer. Listen to the voice of the C officers. They will tell you not only the problem, not only the opportunity, but also the solution. All you have to do is, like a consultant, give me your watch and tell me it's 3 o'clock. We have 3 minutes to go. That's an excellent solution.
But on that topic, I mean, it's be careful what you ask for, right? We keep talking about being at the level of the C-suite and all that. If you're a CDO and you don't have the skills like Rich described, it's pretty interesting when you go to the boardroom. I mean, you go to the top floor, they got the big table and all. I mean, and you're making a presentation to the board, you better be a business focused, being able to, it's back to your discussion around people skills and all of that. So we always talk about that piece, but it's be careful what you ask for, because if they're not able to have those interactions, then they're more of the technical folks, so they're the data architects, and nothing wrong with any of those roles. It's just then they're not the strategic partner of the C-suite.
And I would describe it as a versatility to be able to reach those areas.
Yep, exactly.
And so my question was really a double down on that, and Richard kind of started a prelude to that, is not thinking about the past, but looking forward for a CDO who is starting day one today, given the shifts in the technology landscape, the citizen coder, citizen data scientist, all of these roles. Do you think the more successful CDO is going to be somebody with deep technical expertise who understands the business, or someone with deep business expertise who understands data and the technology?
That's both.
It's both. Yeah.
It's
It's-
both.
But if you
I think it's the best part
you're
of
not
that.
going to find anybody 50-50, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's what the role has to be, which is why it's a
That's right.
challenge, right? And it's why you see a lot of the roles that have swung one way or the other. If you have someone who's very business oriented but doesn't have an idea of what they're trying to
understand. Where do they start from?
Yeah, yeah.
business, but I understand.
I think the starting point, I mean, I started as an architect, more technical role, and then evolved into more business understanding, business interaction, and so forth. I mean, I think you can start on either end, but to be that ultimate CDO that you're describing, I think you have to land in the middle. You have to be both.
So
There are other factors too that play a role. Sorry, not just having that data, not either sides of the pendulum. Certainly, in terms of being able to have that open mind, learning, curiosity, collaboration. Those are other X factors I think that help determine the success.
The soft skills. Yeah.
So it's clear next year we need a 2-hour session on the CDO roles responsibilities. I think everyone is eager to ask a lot of questions, which is fantastic, and we have a bunch online. I encourage folks, there's a break between, our speakers are here. Please add your questions to Wahuva, but thank you. And Rich is itching to add a further remark. Go ahead.
I want to recruit a session chair for this session, because I'm going to put into the agenda to repeat the session.
Yes.
But so I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about next year. If you would like to be a session chair to have fun, send an email. Or panelist.
Yeah,
Great.
fantastic. Thank you so much. If you add your question online, we're still gonna look at them and answer. So yeah, don't worry. And also come and talk. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for panelists.